You know that specific kind of silence that happens right before a car crash? That split second where your brain registers the danger, but your body hasn't reacted yet? That was my life at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday, standing barefoot on my own driveway, shivering in a bathrobe I've owned since the Clinton administration, watching red and blue strobe lights bounce off the siding of the house I spent my entire life savings to buy. A police cruiser was idling at the curb, and stepping out of it wasn't some rookie cop, but an officer looking exhausted, holding a notepad like a weapon, and behind him, clicking her heels on the asphalt with the rhythmic precision of a ticking time bomb, was Pamela Vance. She wasn't just a neighbor, she was the president of the Oakwood Hollow Homeowners Association, a woman who wore pastel cardigans like battle armor and wielded the community bylaws like a loaded shotgun. And as she pointed a manicured finger at me, screaming about criminal trespassing on the very land I paid the mortgage on, I realized this wasn't about a sign. This wasn't about grass height. This was an attempted execution of my life. "There he is, officer," she hissed, her voice cutting through the morning fog like a serrated knife. Illegal commercial signage, defiance of direct orders, and trespassing on association-regulated aesthetic zones. And as she spoke, stabbing her finger toward a tiny, 8-inch aluminum square sitting 18 inches inside my property line, I felt a cold knot form in my stomach that had nothing to do with the temperature. See, 3 years ago, when I bought this modest ranch house in Oakwood Hollow using the last scraps of cash from a divorce that left me with trust issues and a classic 1969 Mustang restoration project, I thought I was buying peace, a place where I, Elias Thorne, a mechanical engineer who just wanted to tinker in his garage and drink bad coffee on the porch, could finally breathe. The neighborhood was perfect back then. 89 homes built in the late 70s, shaded by massive elm trees that looked like they had stories to tell, run by an HOA president named Mr. Abernathy, a gentle 80-year-old soul who smelled like peppermint and old books, who once told me on the day I moved in, "Son, as long as you don't build a nuclear reactor in the front yard, we don't care what you do." And for 2 years, that was the gospel truth. We had block parties where the biggest drama was who burned the burgers. Kids rode their bikes down the center of the street without parents tracking them via GPS. And my neighbor, Mrs. Higgins, a retired librarian with a beagle named Barnaby, who was older than most of the furniture in my house, would wave to me every morning as I headed to work. But power vacuums never stay empty for long, do they? When Mr. Abernathy stepped down due to health issues, we didn't get a transition. We got a hostile takeover in the form of Pamela Vance, a 40-something real estate agent with hair so stiff it could withstand hurricane-force winds and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, forcing her way into the presidency on a platform of protecting our investment, which is corporate speak for, "I'm going to make your life a living hell." Within weeks, the neighborhood transformed from a community into a minimum security prison camp. The warm waves from neighbors were replaced by suspicious glances. The laughter of children was silenced by threat letters about noise pollution, and Pamela's white Mercedes SUV began patrolling the streets at dawn and dusk, a sleek shark in a sea of minivans, looking for blood. She handed out fines like Halloween candy. Mr. Sato, a quiet man down the street, got hit for excessive patriotic display because he flew a flag to honor his son who died in service. A single mom named Sarah got cited because her kids used sidewalk chalk, which Pamela classified as unauthorized graffiti, and Mrs. Higgins was told her vintage bird feeders were sanitary hazards. I thought I was safe. I kept my head down. I mowed my lawn on a diagonal stripe pattern just to be safe. I painted my shutters the approved shade of eggshell despair, but then I made the fatal mistake of upgrading my irrigation system. Being an engineer, I did everything by the book. Pulled the permits, hired the certified contractors, installed a high-pressure system that would keep my lawn green without wasting water. But because the system operated above a certain PSI, the city safety code, not the HOA, the city, mandated a small warning sign near the sidewalk to alert utility workers. It was a tiny thing, barely noticeable, just a safety requirement. But to Pamela, it was a declaration of war, an unsightly commercial advertisement that disrupted the visual continuity of her personal kingdom. The first email hit my inbox at 11:42 p.m., marked high priority, demanding removal. And when I politely replied citing the municipal safety code that literally required the sign to be there, she didn't just double down. She went nuclear, slapping me with a $50 a day fine that began immediately. I tried to be rational. I really did. I went to the bylaws. I highlighted the sections about safety equipment exemptions. I printed out the state statutes. But when I walked into the next board meeting, scheduled conveniently at 10 a.m. on a workday when nobody could attend, I found Pamela and her 3 hand-picked board members sitting there like a tribunal of judges in a kangaroo court. I laid out my case. 45 minutes of impeccable logic, diagrams, legal citations, proving that state law trumped HOA aesthetic rules, proving that removing the sign would actually make me liable for negligence if a utility worker got hurt. And they just stared at me with glazed eyes, bored, checking their watches, before voting 3-0 to uphold the fines and, just for kicks, doubling them to $100 a day for insubordination. That was the moment the switch flipped in my brain, the moment the polite neighbor died and the engineer with a grudge was born. Because as I walked out of that community center, vibrating with rage, Mrs. Higgins pulled me into the shadows behind a vending machine, her hands shaking as she pressed a thick, terrifyingly heavy manila envelope into my chest. "She's not just doing this to you, Elias," she whispered, looking over her shoulder like we were spies in a Cold War thriller. "I've been keeping copies. I've been watching her. She's doing this to the vulnerable ones, the old folks, the single moms, the people who can't fight back. And Elias, she's taking their houses." I opened the folder right there in the dim light of the hallway, and what I saw made my blood run cold. It wasn't just fines, it was a pattern, a systematic destruction of homeowners designed to break them financially until they had no choice but to sell. And every single time they sold, the listing agent was none other than Pamela Vance. But even then, standing there with the evidence in my hands, I didn't realize how deep the rot went. I didn't realize that I wasn't just fighting a power-tripping Karen. I was stepping into the ring with a sophisticated criminal enterprise that was about to try and destroy everything I had ever worked for. When you realize you're being hunted, your priorities shift, and suddenly restoring a Mustang in the garage doesn't seem as important as turning that garage into a war room. Covering the walls with timelines, bylaws, and photos connected by red string like I was trying to catch the Zodiac killer. I spent $3,000 I didn't have on a consultation with Eleanor Cross, a property attorney who looked like she ate HOAs for breakfast and picked her teeth with the bones of corrupt board members. And she told me something that changed the entire trajectory of the fight. In this state, Elias, an HOA lien can absolutely foreclose on your house. But here's the catch. Board members with a financial interest in the outcome are legally required to recuse themselves. Pamela Vance wasn't recusing herself. She was the judge, jury, and executioner. And thanks to the stack of documents Mrs. Higgins had given me, documents that smelled like lavender and conspiracy, I could see the game plan. Find them until they break, force a foreclosure or a distress sale, buy the property cheap through a shell company, and flip it for a massive profit. I installed cameras, high-definition eyes watching my property 24/7, catching Pamela creeping onto my lawn at dawn with a tape measure, documenting the length of my grass, taking photos of my trash cans if they were out 5 minutes too long, building a dossier to justify the next wave of fines. She tried to ban the cameras, of course, sent me a cease and desist letter claiming I was intimidating board members and violating privacy. But I knew the law now. I knew that in public spaces there is no expectation of privacy, and my front yard was my fortress. But the stress was eating me alive. I was popping antacids like candy. My bank account was draining faster than I could refill it because Pamela had escalated the fines to nearly $2,000. And then came the lien notice, a terrifying piece of paper from the county clerk declaring that my house, my sanctuary, was now collateral for a debt that shouldn't even exist. My boss at the engineering firm, David, called me into his office one afternoon, looking uncomfortable, sliding a letter across his desk. Pamela had written to my employer, claiming I was unstable, harassed community leaders, and was a potential threat to workplace safety, a move so dirty, so personal, that it took every ounce of my self-control not to drive to her office and scream. I was losing, the fines were mounting, the neighbors were terrified into silence, and Mr. Sato told me he was thinking of just paying the fines and moving away because the stress was giving him heart palpitations. And that's when I realized that being right wasn't enough. I needed to be undeniable. I dug into the county archives, specifically the original charter for Oakwood Hollow from 1982, buried in a dusty basement that smelled of mildew and bureaucracy, and I found the smoking gun, the holy grail of loopholes. Any change to the schedule of fines or rules required a 67% majority vote from all homeowners, by written ballot, not just a board vote. Pamela hadn't held a vote in 2 years. Every fine, every new rule, every citation she had issued since taking office wasn't just unfair, it was illegal, void, a ghost haunting us with no corporeal form. But before I could launch my counterattack, she hit me where it hurt the most. I woke up at 2 a.m. to a sound that every homeowner dreads, the hiss of spraying water where it shouldn't be, and I ran outside to find my front yard flooded, my new irrigation system decimated. The main valve sheared off with bolt cutters, water pouring into Mrs. Higgins' basement next door. By sunrise, Pamela was there with a citation for negligent property maintenance causing damage to community assets and nuisance flooding, grinning like a shark who smells blood in the water, thinking she had finally nailed me, thinking she had broken me. But she forgot about the cameras. I watched the footage in my garage, shaking with adrenaline, watching a figure in dark clothes creep onto my lawn at 1:58 a.m., seeing the glint of the bolt cutters in the moonlight, and while the face was covered, the car parked down the street under the streetlight was unmistakable. A white Mercedes SUV with a vanity plate I'd memorized weeks ago. I didn't call the police immediately, not the local ones she had charmed. I called Julian Hayes, an investigative journalist I'd been feeding info to for weeks, a guy who looked like he slept in his car and lived for exposing corruption, and I told him, I have the footage, I have the financial records, and I have the shell company connections. It's time to burn it down. We connected the dots. A company called Apex Horizon Holdings was buying up the foreclosed homes in our neighborhood and 3 others nearby, buying them for pennies on the dollar. And the registered agent for Apex Horizon? It was hidden behind layers of corporate veils, but Julian had a forensic accountant who peeled them back until we found the name on the bank account, Pamela Vance. She wasn't just a power-hungry HOA president. She was running a racketeering ring, a RICO case wrapped in beige cardigans, stealing millions of dollars in equity from families by manufacturing violations to steal their homes. I called Eleanor, my lawyer, and she looked at the evidence spread across my dining table. The video of the vandalism, the illegal fine structure, the shell company documents, the affidavits from Mr. Sato and Mrs. Higgins, and she smiled a smile that was terrifyingly sharp. Elias, she said, we aren't just going to sue her civilly, we're going to get the feds involved. The finale wasn't in a courtroom, not at first. It was in the high school gymnasium where Pamela had called an emergency community meeting to try and force through a retroactive vote to legitimize her illegal fines, realizing the walls were closing in and trying to patch the holes in her sinking ship. The room was packed, tensions were so high you could taste the ozone, and Pamela stood on the stage, flanked by her cronies, ranting about troublemakers and anarchists who were ruining property values, her voice shrill and desperate, sweat beading on her forehead despite the heavy makeup. She tried to call for a vote, pulling out a stack of proxy ballots, votes from homeowners who weren't there, claiming she had the majority, claiming she had the power, and that's when I stood up, not alone, but with Julian Hayes and a camera crew broadcasting live to the evening news, and with Eleanor Cross holding a stack of legal filings thick enough to stop a bullet. Point of order, I shouted, my voice echoing off the cheap acoustic tiles. These proxy votes are fraudulent. Pamela, just like the fines, just like the lien on my house, and just like the shell company Apex Horizon that you're using to buy the homes you force into foreclosure. The room went dead silent, the kind of silence that screams, and Pamela froze, her mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock, and I projected the evidence onto the big screen behind her, the flowcharts of the money, the video of her cutting my sprinkler lines, the text messages she sent to investors promising inventory, coming soon from Oakwood Hollow. This isn't an HOA, I told the crowd, looking at my neighbors, seeing the dawn of realization on Mr. Sato's face, on Sarah's face. This is a crime scene. Before she could scream, before she could threaten to sue me, the double doors at the back of the gym burst open, not for dramatic effect, but because federal agents don't knock when they have a warrant for wire fraud, mail fraud, and conspiracy. Officer Reynolds, accompanied by FBI agents in windbreakers that said DOJ, marched down the center aisle, and the look on Pamela's face shifted from arrogance to pure, unadulterated terror as the handcuffs clicked, a sound louder than any gavel. They walked her out past the neighbors she had terrorized, past Mrs. Higgins who clutched her dog Barnaby and wept openly, past Mr. Sato who stood at attention and saluted the agents. And as they shoved her into the back of a federal vehicle, she was still screaming about grass height and property values, completely detached from reality. In the aftermath, the dominoes fell with satisfying precision. The liens were dissolved. The fines were refunded with interest paid from Pamela's seized assets. The entire board resigned in disgrace, and I found myself elected as the interim president, a job I didn't want but took just to dismantle the surveillance state she had built. Pamela got 5 years in federal prison. Apparently, judges frown upon using community governance as a cover for grand larceny. 6 months later, I stood on my driveway, coffee in hand, barefoot again, but this time the only lights were the sunrise hitting the dew on the grass. The sign is still there. My little 8-inch aluminum rebellion, shining in the morning light, a testament to the fact that sometimes you have to fight the petty battles to win the war, and sometimes the guy obsessing over the bylaws isn't the villain. He's the only thing standing between you and a predator in a pantsuit. But it leaves you wondering, doesn't it? We give these associations almost unlimited power over our biggest investments. We sign away our rights for the promise of neighborhood standards. But at what point does community management become tyranny? At what point does the desire for a perfect lawn outweigh the right to live in peace? Because in Oakwood Hollow, we learn the hard way that the monster isn't always under the bed. Sometimes she's just across the street, measuring your grass with a ruler, waiting for you to blink. And me? I'm keeping the cameras, just in case.